Welcome to Awake Radio. Me and my parents and friends are here at Awake Radio to help people understand the dangers of chemtrails, GMOs, and many other things we are faced with on this planet Earth. Did you know the government is bad? You want to know why? Because they don't like us speaking the truth. Awake Radio was created because we're concerned about what some people are doing to destroy humanity. We all do shows here to help people get a better understanding of what is happening in our world. Thanks for tuning in into Awake Radio, Street Talk for the awake and new aware.
Welcome, everybody, to Turtle Talk. I'm Barbara Three Crow, your host today. I'm talking to you from the beautiful Hudson Valley here in upstate New York. Again, I'd like to thank Patty for bringing me on and all the listeners. Today, I was realizing how involved it is to be a host. I'm fairly new at this, but I really respect and am amazed at what it takes and all the hosts on Awake Radio, what they go through, the preparations, the searches they do, and all the preparation. You have to get your coffee set up. You got to get your toilet paper ready. During the break. All this stuff. Anyway, It's quite an adventure here, and I'm just happy to be here today. I hope that what I share with you today, I always say this, will sing to your heart spirit. I am going to be playing an audio a little bit after I share some things. This is one of the clan mothers of the Anishinaabe clan people, Winona LaDuke. She's a wonderful speaker, and I think it's really important for all of us what she's going to share. First, I'm going to read something that is very dear to my heart. I've talked about this pretty much for the last 20-some years, but it's about prophecy, of course. Where we are today, and in regards to the sacred feminine, of course, which I've come to understand means a tribal consciousness, an understanding of ourselves in relationship to the sacred mother and the balance and harmony of ourselves as men and women. So I wrote this a while back. This is prophecy, actually. And it said, it goes like this: when the grandmothers speak, the world will heal. Now, that's a prophecy. This is about, of course, the matrilineal, the clan mothers coming back round again, the full circle. So the winds of prophecy in this moment, and it has been moving towards this, are calling the grandmothers, the clan mothers, and women of all nations, to come together. I call it to fulfill our sacred responsibility, as women. And we know that we have arrived at a crucial time of great change. At present, we are witnessing what I call the breakup and shattering of all systems that were contrived by the dominator patriarchy rule and the hierarchy of religious dogma. Now, these unnatural structures dictate all of society. We have education, religion, financial and political systems that have ruled our lives, our thoughts, and our beliefs for literally hundreds of years. I see this as deliberate and a malevolent intent. Those who deemed themselves the voice for the people had excluded the voices and the dreams and the wisdom of women until now. So the voices of our grandmothers speak. They say to us, now is the time. I used to hear these words in my head a couple of years ago. I used to hear, now is the time. Now is the time. I said, what is that? What does that mean? And I think I was listening to one of the elders giving a talk, and out of his mouth came, now is the time. And I said, well, there it is again. But I believe it is. Now is the time. And the ancestors are speaking to us, talking about, of course, the sacred feminine, the women. We are givers of life. And we were once known throughout history as healers and herbalists, midwives, shamans, medicine women. We're mothers and sisters, grandmothers and aunties to all the children of all nations. And women were the original peacekeepers, specifically of the First Nations here of Turtle Island. This is where we live here. I'm talking to you from Turtle Island. The First Nations elders were the wisdom keepers, and traditionally the grandmothers were an essential voice during councils. The respect for the grandmothers ended when the First Nations were dominated by the European invasion. When it came time to meet with the government officials during that time, the grandmothers were not welcomed. They were turned away. Now, this was due to the archaic policies that was entrenched in the minds of the European nations prior to their coming here. For centuries, the ancient symbols of the Divine Mother throughout the old world had been vanquished. We know this is history. You can find that information. And today we realize that these policies were meant to exclude the indispensable voices of the grandmothers and the clan mothers, who, along with the grandfathers of the First Nations, sustained the balance and harmony needed for the survival of their people. The exclusion of the grandmothers and clan mothers initiated a deliberate devaluation of a sacred ideology. This was a code of ethics that the First Nations throughout Turtle Island had valued and had safeguarded from the beginning of their history. A sacred ideology that sanctioned their respect and unmitigated regard for the Divine Mother, the sacred feminine, the Mother Earth, and all of life. Now, the breakup and shattering of the centuries-old dominant system is noteworthy in regard to the prophecy that we are now living, which is the fifth hoop, 1,000 years of peace in relation to the time of enlightenment, which brings back the way of knowing, or the Creator's law, the law of the land, which I believe truly links to the sacred feminine, the clan mother system, and the balance of the way the people lived. So this designates this, where we are living right now, as the time to reestablish this position of our grandmothers and the clan mothers that they once held. You know, we've talked about this, and this is happening. So the opportunity is presented to us now. As the breakup and shattering increases, we see this. Everything around us is in upheaval. All the systems that I spoke about before are all being exposed and being just falling apart, breaking up. So this time is now. This is part of prophecy here. Prophecy said that all things will fall apart. And when that happens, it's time for a rebirth. It's a death and rebirth. It's time for renewal. But in the moment when we come to that place, we're putting it in a position to have to determine how we want to rebirth ourselves, how we want this renewal, the new world, to be, to look, to experience. What is it that we choose? And we're all being given this opportunity, so that all women are being called to return to the forefront, to take up position. Well, I call us sacred activists, and to become the voice for the people of all nations, black, red, yellow, and white. So I'm talking to all of the women out there. You know, you don't have to be red, yellow, black, or white. You're one of our sisters. Doesn't matter. But to come and speak from the heart, speak from our hearts. What is needed? And also what is no longer tolerable to us as mothers, as grandmothers. So the universal wisdom of the Divine Mother communicates the way of our ancestors. It's inside of us. You have the universal wisdom inside of you. It was given to all of us, you know. I just don't want to say just for the women, because this wisdom was given to all, men and women. We're born with this because we are born from a creator, mother, father, sacred children. So we all receive this wisdom, the innate knowledge. The grandmothers are being guided to restore unity amongst all nations and return to the fundamental nature. That means our fundamental nature of you, the men out there listening, and women also, as the divine masculine that you are, and the divine feminine. So let us listen to the voices of the grandmothers and commit to restoring the values that we all hold dear, especially to the women, the voices of the women, their wisdom and their influence for the world at large. You know, one thing about this time of this prophecy is I was told about this prophecy over 20 years ago about the return of the sacred feminine and women returning to the sacred circles. The ways of the grandmothers, you know, the grandmothers would sit in the circle with the women and teach them, share them wisdom and knowledge with them. And the same with the men. The men had their sacred circles. But one thing I was told, that we have to heal the wound that we carry within us. Now, I'm talking about that wound that our mothers carried, that wound that our grandmothers carried, and so on. And we hold that inside of our heart, our spirit. And the same with our brothers. They all hold a wound too. And how are we going to come together? How are we going to create harmony and balance if we don't heal that wound first? So we're talking about when you want to step up to the plate, as you're being asked to by the ancestors, and stand strong for the people. If you want to have peace on the earth, peace in your life, if you want your children and your grandchildren to be happy and joyous, and for all of us, we all want to survive, hey. You know, you have to heal what separates you from your truth first, You have to heal what keeps us separated as people. Okay, so the women, you have to heal that wound, that anger. Not only, I guess, at yourself, but I'm going to say the anger and the wound we have toward our brothers. If we don't heal that, we can't lead the way. We can't step forward and say, come on, my brother, come on, my friend. And that's unity and togetherness. Now, why I'm saying women stepping forward and turning and saying, come on, my brother, is because I was told that women were to lead the way at this time. And I was like, well, why do we have to do that? I mean, I really asked that question. And the answer was because you can do it. Because you were the original peacekeepers. This is innate within you. You're givers of life. You see the world in a different way. Yeah. So I just wanted to start out with that. So I guess the main piece here is we're all being asked, men and women, to heal what prevents us from being in harmony with ourselves and with each other. And so I started out with that a little bit, and I'm going to continue here with this audio. It's about 48 minutes. So we'll listen to one of the clan mothers of the Anishinaabe people, Winona LaDuke, and she has wonderful things to tell us, a lot about prophecy and about the land, the culture, and it really, it's for everyone, actually. So we're going to play that, and then I'll get back to you on the other side, and we'll continue with our discussion. Thank you.
I'm greeting you in my language, which is Anishinaabe, and I'm thanking you for the honor of being here tonight. And I'm telling you where I'm from, which is the Bear Clan Mississippi Band from the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota. And just telling you a little bit about our area, and thanking you all for coming tonight. And in our way, we refer to everyone as our relations, because we are all related, and acknowledging that. And in being asked to discuss these issues of spirituality and policy and society, it is a challenge to anyone to kind of grapple with these issues. And I need to kind of issue a disclaimer, and that I practice as best as I can walking on this earth. That's what I say. But I'm certainly not a scholar on Native religious practices, nor am I someone who knows about all these different things. I practice in our own way in our community. I'm a traditional practitioner, but there are many people who have way many more years on this earth that have had a lot more experience in these things than I. And so I'll try to express to you the best as I can on these issues. But I think it's important to just really be honest with you, and that I'm going to speak from my own experience and the life that I've led, and the honor that I had in my life to meet people like Shelley, like people in all areas in our community who struggle on these issues, and people who have immense dignity and are asking basically a simple question, which is the question of how to walk the path that the Creator gave you. They're asking to do that. Oh, am I falling away? Oh, I'm too soft. My children would never say that is possible. I have a friend out there who knows how my children are. They think I'm very, very loud and abrasive. But there are, I've had the honor of my life to meet many of these people who just ask this simple question: to live in dignity, to be able to pray at their sacred sites, to be able to carry on their religious practice, to be able to walk, essentially that path that the Creator gave them. And that is in the era of globalization, or in the continuation of globalization, in the era in which we find ourselves. It seems like an immense challenge. And so I will kind of tell you some of those stories as best as I can, but that is where I've learned from. And what I would like to say is that in starting, I would like to talk about a couple of prophecies for our people. And I would say that these are significant prophecies not only to Anishinaabe people, or to Lakota people, but to all indigenous peoples. And I say this because I know quite honestly, here in Seattle we are much more perhaps astute and thoughtful and politically correct, we think anyway, than in other areas in the country. But quite often, to be honest, there is pretty much a across-the-board dismissal of Native prophecies or Native teachings as being interesting and folkloric. For instance, our stories, some of our most significant stories are taught kind of in the folklore anthropology section, in these universities. And when we talk about whether it is Native philosophy, it is not held in the same regard as that perhaps which might come from Europe, or our scientific knowledge, which we wouldn't call scientific knowledge, we would call it our knowledge of the creation. It is not held in the same regard. It is as a consequence of the set of relations between Native people and non-Native people in this society, it is quite frankly held in lower regard. And that is one of the challenges we face as Native people, is this long history. And when I tell you these stories tonight, or these prophecies, I'll tell you that we hold them in very high regard. And that when I tell you these things, I tell you because in our community we think that perhaps there is something to learn from them. And in our work, in my own community, they guide our work. So there are two prophecies. One prophecy I will tell you, it is a long time ago, it's called the People of the Seventh Fire, which is Anishinaabe prophecy from our community. And they say that a long, long time ago that these teachers came. And each society has teachers that come. You always need teachers that come and tell you how to be better humans. Because we're not so smart that we can usually figure that out on our own. You go along and try to do the best you can, but you need someone to come tell you that. And these people came to us, and they talked about these times, and they call those the times of the seven fires. And they said what would happen in each of those times. And in the course of those times, they talked about, for instance, when we were on the East Coast, they talked about in us being on the East Coast that we would move west. We would follow a shell in the sky. And as we followed that shell in the sky, we would move to this place where the food grows upon the water, which is what they say is wild rice. But food grows upon the water, and that's where we would move to. And they talked about how hard times would come to our people in the third, fourth, fifth fire. Times would come where people would come from a different place, and some of them would be good-hearted and some would not. That is true. People came from someplace else, and some of them were really good-hearted and some were really not. When they talked about that time would come. And then they talked about that our people would be in disarray. That we would lose many things. Many of our people would die. 90% depopulation. That's what happened to most indigenous communities, 90% depopulation. They talked about that would happen, and that we would lose many of our people. And then we would lose many of our things. They talk about that. Lose many of our things, they say. Which is what you see, I cannot believe, a lot of our things are still in museums. A lot of our people, as are still in these museums, these different places. It broke my heart. I visit with these Haida people, and I didn't know that some of their whole villages were hauled off to museums. Just to totally imagine, that conceptually I cannot imagine hauling off an entire village, to put it in a museum. But the immensity of that loss to our communities, it's hard to express. But I say that because it's a grief. It's a historic grief, and it's a present grief when it happens to you, when your sacred bundles and all your things and your ancestors are in these museums. But they talked about that would happen. And then they talk about how after a time we would start to get those things back, and that's what you see. And as I sit here and I'm able to talk to you tonight, it is ironic that it was just a little over 20 years ago when the United States government finally passed the American Indian Religious Freedom Act in this country, which recognized our right to practice our religion, which is important in a country which is founded on religious freedom. That in 1978, finally, 200 years later, essentially, there was a recognition that we would have a right to practice our religion. But some serious omissions in that in itself. And that it seems that you cannot practice your religion if you want to practice in a place where they want to log, they want to mine, or they want to climb, And now that's, but I say that because that is a part of our whole struggle to recover that dignity of just trying to walk that path that you have, that the Creator gave you, trying to do something simple like that. They talked about that time, and they said in that time that we would start recovering things. And then they said Ashki Anishinabeg. The Ashki Anishinabeg would come. And they called that the people of the seventh fire. And they said that is the time now, when the Ashki Anishinabeg would come. The new people. That's how they refer to us. And they say that, we will have gone through these things, and we'll be a little different, but we will go and we will recover things which are along the way. We'll stand up as new people, and in that time, when we are these new people, that we will have a chance to make a choice. And they say that there are two paths ahead for us, Ashki and Anishinabeg people. They say that one path they refer to as a path that is well worn, but it is scorched. That's what they said. A path that is well worn, but it is scorched. And the second path they say is green. That's what they say. They say that we have that path and it is a green path. And they say that that is the choice that we have as Ashki and Anishinabeg. So I share that prophecy with you, that teaching that we have, because that very much guides the work that we do in our community, in our own, humble way on the White Earth Reservation at the White Earth Land Recovery Project. But it is something that some of us feel, we are told that has a broader set of implications. That we all have this choice as the new people. The second prophecy I share briefly with you. I share it because I work on this issue. And I'm going to talk more about it later. I'll talk about both these things. But I'm not a Lakota. And, but I had the honor of working with some of these people, and I work on this trying to stand up for Mushkatay Bijiki, our elder brother, the buffalo. And there was a teaching of a long time ago that a long time ago this woman came to the Lakota people, and she was called the White Buffalo Calf Woman. And she came, and when she arrived, their community was in some disarray, like all of our communities get to, And this woman came, and she taught that community how to pray, how to talk to the Creator, which is one of the greatest gifts you can have, is how to talk to the Creator, And she gave those ceremonies, and it is, there's some stories about how it was she came, and that confusion about that time. But then they said that she walked away, and when she walked away, she rolled, and she turned into a white buffalo calf. And she rolled again. She rolled again. She rolled again, and she walked away as a buffalo calf. Different colors she turned to each time. And they said that one day she would return. That's what they said. One day she would return. And here it was just a few years ago, some of you may recall, that a white buffalo calf was born to a farmer in Wisconsin. Hyder, I think his name is Dave Hyder. Very nice guy, This white buffalo calf is known as Miracle. And if you go out there, you'll see that there are tens of thousands of prayer offerings that were given by people, because when they saw that return, that was prophesied. And they said that when that return would happen, when the white buffalo calf would return, that it would be a time of change, and a time when there would be the beginning of finding of a harmony, that the different colors would start to come together. So I share those stories with you, those two stories, and you can, they're told in some of our communities, and there are people who tell them much better than I. But the reason I share them with you is that those actually guide some of the work that a lot of our communities do. And in the case of us, in my work, they guide us. And they are not things that we romanticize or trivialize or put aside. They're things that we view and hold them as a wellspring of practice to understand where we are and where we're going. And it is said sometimes that people, like Indian people, that we want to go back. We don't want to go back. I think that is part of the trivializing of us as Indian people. They say, those Indian people, they want to go back and be like it was. And it is not about that. It is not about going back. It is about finding your life way. That's what they say. It is about finding your life way, the path that you are given, so that you can walk ahead on that path. That's what it is. It's about finding the life way. It's not about going back. It's about finding that life way, returning to the life way, if that is what we call it. But it is not something that is in the past. It is something which is present. It is something which is in the future. Now I tell you that because this is what guides much of our work. But also, when I consider those things, what is our life way? What is our life way? And I will talk a little, if you will call it philosophically, about what it is, this meaning, this Minobhamata Siwan. That's what a word is in our language, which means the good life, the good life. The alternate translation is continuous rebirth. That's the alternate translation of that phrase. And I'm not a very good speaker of Ojibwe. I must say I'm in a pretty extensive Ojibwe program in my community, but I'm still someone who, when I talk, they ask me, those old people I go to ceremonies and they say, Winona, you talk good in English, you should talk so good in Ojibwe. So I'm working, when I talk, and they lean over a little bit like this when I'm talking sometimes, and they say, I think what she's saying is. So I don't want you to think that I'm a very good speaker, but I'm okay. I'm working at it. Minobhamata Siwan. That's what that means, though. They walk along in a good way. They walk on that path. What does that mean? What does that mean? I'm going to tell you a few things about what I think that means. And this is what I have gleaned from listening to those old people talk and having them listen to me, and they say, you should say it like this. That's how they talk to me. Say it like this. That's what they say, They say that natural law is the highest law. That's what they say. That's our teaching. Natural law is the highest law, higher than the laws made by nations, states, or municipalities. And one would do well to live in accordance with natural law. That's what they say. Because they say if you do not do so, that would be kind of foolish. That would kind of make an assumption that you've got a better way figured out. And in the smallness that we are in that web of life, that would be kind of, in our assessment, a big gamble. So we try to live as best as we can in accordance with natural law. How do we know what is natural law? We have two sources of our knowledge. First thing, intergenerational residency. What's that mean? It means if you live for 1,000 years in an ecosystem, you got a pretty good idea how things are. My children's grandpa, I always tell this story about him. His name is James Small. He's from James Bay in northern Quebec. He's not in the teachings here that they would have, a very educated man. Went to school to the 8th grade. That James Small. But that James Small, he's a trapper. Lives out there in the brush most of the year, in the bush. And one year I'm up there with him, and he says to me, Winona, you know that the martens are migrating west. So he says to me, y'all know what a marten is? You're environmentalists, ecologists, right? Martens. Furry animals. Those guys. I said, what do you mean martens are migrating west? He says the martens, once every 70 years, the martens migrate west. That's what he says to me. Now who the heck's going to know that? Who's been up to James Bay for that long? Only them Crees. Those Inuits. Those people. That's not people that been up for 280, 350 years to see that migration. When they do this, this activity. That's intergenerational residency in place. That's what he says. And I say that to you because the irony is that someone like James Small or James Garrett or these different Indian people who know this intergenerational knowledge of place are not considered qualified to sit at the table in public policy meetings. They're not considered qualified to teach at universities like this because they don't have a PhD. They're not considered qualified in public hearing processes. But at the same time, I think sometimes things maybe change a little bit. Interestingly enough here, in accordance with natural law, last year there was a gathering sponsored by NASA down in Albuquerque. I didn't get the opportunity to go to it, but I asked those people what it was like. NASA called together a bunch of elders from the Indian community to ask them what they thought about global warming. You know? And I thought that was an interesting thing. You know, they asked those people what they thought about global warming. And those Indian people, they listened to those NASA guys, and they, you know, showed them all these things about this is defrosting, this is moving, you know. So Indians say, yeah, we know that. You know, we could have told you that 20 years ago. You know, I mean, you live out there in the brush or on the tundra, you know what's going on. You know, it's not like you don't need a bunch of people with computer models to tell you that. You observe that. You observe that. And those scientists said, so what you Indian people, what you think about that? What should we do? That's what they asked those elders, and those elders said, this is the summary, you know. They said it much more eloquently. They said, you guys made that mess, you fix it. You know? And so maybe there is some consideration of that, but I think they wanted, like, you know, they wanted the ceremony, the no global warming ceremony, and we don't have that. You know? Can I say, we don't really have that one. It's not in our repertoire. I don't know, but maybe I'll ask, and we'll see. So, you know, that is one source of our knowledge, is this intergenerational residency in place. Another source of our knowledge is spiritual practice. And I say that because this issue on sacred sites, you know, if you go to a place to renew your relationship to the Creator, or if you harvest in something certain, you know, in a certain place every year, that's what you do, you know, for your ceremonial practice. That's how we get a lot of our instruction. That's where we get it. You know, and I say that because it is so significant to our community. You know, I cannot even express the significance of it. So I said I'm just a small person in our ceremony, but that is why preservation of native free exercise of religion, you know, and of these sacred sites is important to our community, because that's how we get what you're supposed to do. You know, what you're supposed to do all the time. That's where we get it. We don't get it from someplace else. We get it from, you know, we get it from those prayers, those ceremonies. So what do we know about natural law? We know that that it's all alive. You know, now you hear these in the new environmental phases. You know, they're talking about the web of life. They're talking about the Gaia principle. You know, that it's alive. Everything's alive. That's right. As we always said, it's alive. Everything's alive around us. In our language, most of those nouns are animate. A lot of those nouns are animate in our language. Word asin, word for stone in our language, is an animate noun. You know, most of these things are animate in our language. Mitig, for tree, animate. Ironically enough, I always laugh at this. Daban, word for car, also animate in our language. You know, but I say that, which means in its essence that means that we recognize them as alive, having spirit, having standing on their own. And so when we reckon with that which is around us, we reckon with it with that respect, that it is alive, has spirit, has standing. And one would do well to treat that which is alive with that kind of respect. And so whatever it is, if we go and harvest wild rice, I went picking wild rice this year, you know, up on Blackbird Lake, on Tamarack National Wildlife Refuge. And I go put my sema out, tobacco out. Thank that for giving itself to me, because it feeds itself, feeds us. That's our practice. Reciprocity, the anthropologists call it, reciprocity. You always give when you take. You always give when you take. Give your tobacco, our sema. That's our teaching, because it's alive, has spirit, and you thank for giving its spirit to you. But you always have to give something when you take something from our ecosystem. That's what they say. But in addition to that, what we know is you only take what you need and you leave the rest. That's what we say. I tell you those teachings, you know, as best as I can, but because the fact is that this industrial society is not like that at all. What has happened here is that, for instance, even the concept of natural law being the highest law in this land. You know how many hearings I go to every year where they're talking about new laws on increasing allowable dosages? You know, increasing radiation levels, increasing allowable dosages, increasing mercury emissions. You know, Our perception is that we can make whatever laws we want to. This society, we can make whatever laws you want to. We can juggle them. We can trade pollution credits. We could say, well, these people, they won't fish, so these guys can fish. We can do all those things under the law that they create in the society. But in the end, you and I know natural law is preeminent. You and I know that if you put it in the water, you're going to drink it. You and I know if you put it in the air, ultimately, somehow it comes back. So we could say whatever we want to, under the laws. But that is one of the challenges we have. We've come to think that we are so clever, so very clever in this society that we can make something up, condense it down. I had this discussion up with my tribal biologist here. In the Indian reservations, we have all the bad projects. All the bad projects come to us. And, so we, all these proposals for nuclear waste dumps, right, come to our reservation, Although Hanford's a pretty big dump, but right over there by Yakima, And, got these dump proposals, and then you got the, just every really, just bad projects. So then we had the, toxic waste dumps, about 100 different proposals for toxic waste dumps come to our communities, They always got some really good analysis of why it's really a money-making deal for your community. You got that 65% unemployment. This is long-term employment opportunities, you bet. Nuclear waste is a really long-term employment opportunity. This guy's coming with like one project after another. It's like, that, I don't want to say it's the dog and pony show. It's kind of like the, I don't know, you can't even say the tractor and whatever show. Anyway, so these guys come in with this incinerator idea a few years ago for my reservation. And they come in with this incinerator proposal, and they tell our tribal council that this is the incinerator that does not create any air pollution. I says, well, why they won't put it here then? And of course, me, that's what I would have to ask. I didn't know they actually created one that had no pollution yet. Now, somehow you combust it, it must go somewhere. I'm not a moron. I took a couple classes in college, but somehow you combust it, it has to go somewhere. So I'm talking to my tribal biologist, and this guy, a nice guy, but he's not really familiar with all these big technologies. He says, well, we got waste problems on the reservation. So what if we just burn it? He says, and then, well, if we just burn it, that'd be good, then it'll go away, right? It says, no. Did you ever notice that, what you're doing is you're turning a land pollution problem into an air pollution problem? This biologist, he looks at me, he says, but the wind don't blow this way, right? It's like, inevitably at some point it will, But I say that because, these are the kinds of things, you have to consider that in the end, natural law is the highest law. This idea of animate and inanimate. I spend a lot of time arguing over cutting issues in our area. There's this guy, one of my friends back there in the audience, Paul, he knows this guy too, Chip Ohnmeyer, one of my favorite, what would you call him? He's a Becker County forester, kind of a logging consultant. He spends all this time arguing with me about if my reservation is full of timber resources, that's what he calls it. Timber resources. I call it a forest. He looks at it in terms of board feet of timber. I know he's got his calculator there thinking board feet timber. And that is exactly the problem in a lot of the Northwest. In our language, even the English language, the term forest is an animate noun. You start turning everything into timber resources and it's inanimate, and so it totally desensitizes and removes you from what it is your relationship is or what it is that is something that's alive. It turns it into the enemy, which is what we do and what happens in wars. People become troops or whatever. They are no longer humans. Civilian populations, all those things over time. And that is a real, that is a challenge in our language in itself. How we talk about things and how we get into a collective denial, essentially, about what it is, what it is that we're talking about. And in terms of the cyclical thinking, this is the land where there was salmon. And I don't need to tell you all, but we can say that in our teachings, in our teachings of the web of life, or that things are cyclical. Well, you do know, it'll have consequences later, and inevitably there's a cycle of all those things. Inevitably there's a cycle, and whether it is the moons, the tides, or the seasons, or the salmon, they go out in the ocean, and you let somebody go out there with a factory trawler, and then they don't come back. Or you put some dams up, and they don't get up. If you disrupt a cycle, in the end, you have nothing. That's what our teachings would say. And our teachings would also say that you should only take what you need and not the rest of it. That is kind of the challenge we find ourselves in, I believe, as a society. There's the challenge between these two really different worldviews. And they have, in their essence, a set of values associated with them. In their essence, they have worldviews associated with them. And they are abstracted over time into corporate bottom lines or public policies, or they are abstracted into all kinds of manifestations in this society. But in the end, they are manifest on land. They are manifest on ecosystems. They are manifest on the slavery in which most of creation today lives. That is the reality. Is that we never allow anything to live with dignity. Now, I don't know how to say it, but you look at this, I'll talk about that buffalo. You let these things live only to a point that we allow them. That we allow them, and we have reduced most of the world to almost most of the animals in the world and most of creation to close to slavery and the status in which they find themselves. And that is the grievous loss that we have. We've lost our relationship. It is manifest in terms of holocaust of species, the conflict between these two worldviews. Everything is on the verge. You all do not need a lecture on that. But, more extinction of species in the past 150 years than since the Ice Age. About once every, 20 minutes a species gone. Right now. That absence, that loss is so immense. And that same Holocaust has existed with peoples, worldwide and even today. 1 nation per year in the Amazon rainforest, they say. 1 nation per year disappears, extinct. Just like that. That means that they do not exist anymore. The argument that I make, or that most indigenous people will make, is that kind of structure in society, that level of consumption, that level of a society based on a set of values which is based essentially on conquest. It is based on conquest. This is a society based on conquest. That level of a society based on conquest is not sustainable. A society that causes so much extinction is not in the end sustainable. That is the argument we would make. So let me say that as Indigenous people, as our communities and the communities with which I have the honor to work, I find that we are we are people who have a great cultural wealth. We do not have a lot of economic wealth, but in the end, that's not what it is about. But it is the ability to kind of continue your living, your way of life in some way that is with dignity and which is with respect. And at the essence of these policy issues on values, spirituality, and society are many of the issues which we find ourselves faced with. The idea that many of our sacred sites have been totally obliterated. Many of them have been totally obliterated. Celilo Falls is a good example of that. They're on the Columbia River. Places that, we have all these stories about that are turned into these industrial waste sites by the time they are done with it, in this society. We have, of our remaining sacred sites that we talk about, they say that there's more than this. There's probably 100 of them that are totally in danger right now. Those places could be the Sweetgrass Hills up in Montana. They could be Bear Lodge. It may seem like a small thing. I know the same thing goes here on here in the Columbia River. But you have these places, Bear Lodges, what they know as Devil's Tower. When those colonists and whoever it was came out there, they name everything that is sacred devil. They got Devil's Lake, they got Devil's Tower, they got Devil's... that's because they're afraid of us, in our practice in those places. Devil's Tower, it's not known as that. Bear Lodge. And you know what? It's really hard to be praying and you know on that place. I don't do that. I'm not from those communities. But imagine if you are involved in your vision quest process, and some guy like with all his hiking and I don't know what you call those things, that climbing equipment, shows up right in the middle of your ceremony. You know, I understand this ecotourism, and a lot of people out here like to do all that stuff, but you know, you're sitting out there trying to pray, and these guys are climbing the rock around you. You know, that is what happens in our sites. You know, there are so many stories like that, and that is like the least. That is perhaps the least invasive. Obviously, you know, having your site knocked down, you know, for clear cutting or mowed over for mining is pretty invasive to your ability to practice your religious freedom. That is a struggle we have in this society. We are painfully aware of the situation in which we find ourselves today, where our communities must go to this society to have an affirmation of what is sacred. It's the strangest irony to find yourself. A consequence of Holocaust is that in the end what you have is that one society says this is sacred. You know, we had this big fight in Minnesota over this Highway 55. They want to run this highway through a spring that's part of the creation story of the Dakota people. Dakota people say, no, you cannot run a highway through this spring. You know, they run this highway, they reroute it around a military base, Fort Snelling. But they will not reroute the highway around a sacred site. So we go to the hearing to testify after these people have been blockading the road, have been in vigil, have been out there all this time, you know. Go out there and they say, we go to this hearing, and that's what I said at the hearing. It is so ironic at the cusp of the millennium for one community to have to go to another community and say, you know, a community that is new, and say, would you recognize this is sacred? You know, but that is the quandary we find ourselves in this society. It is a similar quandary we find ourselves in terms of the buffalo. I want to speak briefly, you know, on behalf of them. And that a lot of you probably know that we have a problem in Yellowstone National Park with buffalo. This is a really, really important issue to the Native community in terms of sacred. What is sacred? As I said, I'm not a Lakota person, you know. But what I will tell you is that in our teachings, the buffalo is the keeper of the western doorway. And in our teachings, we are told that the reason that we are alive as Indian people is because the buffalo stood up for us. Our older brothers stood up for us. And that is something that we all know. That's something that we all know because they wiped out all the buffalo because they tried to wipe out the Indians in the Great Plains region. They could not militarily destroy the Native people of the Great Plains, and so, unable to destroy the Native people of the Great Plains, Philip Sheridan, commander of the armies of the West, said, if you cannot destroy them militarily, let us destroy their commissary. Let us destroy their food. And so they set upon a military process of destroying the buffalo. And you and I know from history what happened. 50 million buffalo, single largest migratory herd in the world, was destroyed as a result of American military policy. That was an incredible disgrace to the society. And we will be living with that. You cannot do that to an ecosystem and not expect that there is a change. Fact is that the Great Plains ecosystem is the single largest ecosystem in North America, and it has the largest loss of life of any ecosystem in North America. You take out the single largest migratory herd in the world, the buffalo, and then you begin a process in this society, or a process which has begun, which is about the mythology of society. Go west, young man, conquer, till land. You know, that's the whole manifest destiny. That's the whole mythology of what is progress. You know, and those Indians, a long time ago, what they used to say, this one Pawnee guy, he said, grass is no good, turned over. You know, and he was right. You go out there in the Great Plains and go in the Great Plains today, and where there was once 50 million buffalo, today you got 48 million cattle. And that same ecosystem is just almost devoid of biodiversity. In a place where there was once 250 different kinds of grass out there, some of that prairie grass, 6 feet of soil underneath it. 6 feet of soil. 6 feet of roots goes down through the soil underneath those prairie grasses. And that's how they made topsoil. That's how those prairie grasses lived all winter, you know? It was I mean, it was smart grass. That sounds kind of funny. But that's the way that they lived all winter. They weren't like, you didn't have to use a lot of special things for them. Pamper them. They lived good. Those prairie grasses. You had 250 different species of grass you could find in an acre of land out there. You go out there today, 1 acre of land out there in North Dakota, what do you think? Pretty much one crop. One crop. And that crop is pretty much owned by Monsanto or DuPont. First and second largest seed companies in the world. That's pretty large loss of life right there. You have, massive groundwater contamination out there as a direct consequence of trying to raise crops in an ecosystem that shouldn't be supporting those crops. You have the drawdown of the Oglala Aquifer that exists out there in the Great Plains today. That underlies most of states like Nebraska, North and South Dakota, that whole area all the way down to Texas. They say that the drawdown of the aquifer is the equivalent of 4 feet per year, water being sucked out of the Oglala. Recharge rate, they say, is about a half an inch a year. They project that the Oglala Aquifer will be dry in 30 years. Someone like us, someone like me might ask the question like, what are those smart guys going to do in 30 years? After they run out of water in the Oglala Aquifer, they created a whole agricultural system which is totally unsustainable. Totally unsustainable. Everything, topsoil. I live in northwestern Minnesota. I see North Dakota every day. It is blowing towards me. Amount of topsoil out there today, about 6 inches. Regional topsoil, 21 inches out there, they say. Just blowing this way. Because you shouldn't have plowed all that land. They shouldn't have plowed all that land out there. So this buffalo issue is an ecological issue, if you look at it in that terms. But to us, it is a most spiritual issue. And that we're told that those buffalo are our older brothers. And my friend Rosalie Little Thunder, who sits on my board, she was asked to perform a ceremony a few years ago out there in Pittsburgh. It was called a buffalo kill ceremony, which, as I understand, is a ceremony traditionally performed by women. And that ceremony is a ceremony in which you ask the buffalo to give its spirit to you. That's what they say. You ask the buffalo to give its spirit to you. And then you hunt. The men would do the hunting, but the women would hold that ceremony. Because when you harvest, you got to give that recognition. Ask them to give itself to you. So she went, she was reluctant, but she performed this ceremony for this buffalo that this man wanted to offer for this feast. And it was a 17-year-old bull. She performed that ceremony, and she said, I was praying, I was standing there. And she said, I kept praying and, talking, and she said, I finished that ceremony, and that bull was just looking at me, and she said, I had this immense sense of grief. Grief and responsibility. That's what she said. And then she said, I didn't know what to do. I kept praying, She said, in a little while, that buffalo walked away, and that buffalo, he come back. When that buffalo come back, she said, the whole sky lit up some. She said, and when he come back, she says, all of a sudden, I had this immense sense of relief. That's what she said. She said, she recognized that buffalo said, all right, I give my spirit to you. Give myself to you. And when that happened, she said to that buffalo, you tell me what it is I got to do. I owe you. That's what she said to that buffalo. Which is that reciprocity, that relationship. She said 2 weeks later, I got a call from this guy named Pat Smith from Salish and Kootenai Reservation. Attorney, he said, Rosalie, come out here to Montana. They're shooting buffalo out here at Montana. That was the winter of 1996, 1997. The state of Montana Department of Livestock shot 1,100 buffalo as they crossed out of the border of Yellowstone National Park. Now, a lot of you are probably members of the Wilderness Society or know about this, but they create this park, 1872. They carve it out of some Indian lands. They try to make a nice thing. But that park itself is not actually able to support a herd of that size. That's the reality. It's a nice, pretty park. Beautiful, stunning. Doesn't have a lot of grazing lands. The problem is that those grazing lands are all occupied by cattle. Like the rest of the 250 million acres of grazing land in public hands. The cattle are scarfing up all the grazing lands out there. And as far as I can see, there's 48 million cattle. There's not so many buffalo. We need to have the cattle back off the grazing lands a little bit there. That's what we got to do. If we talk about some of these environmental groups talk about a no-cut policy on the forests, we should have a no-graze policy. Some of these public lands. That's what you got to do. You got to back the cattle out of these lands. It's a simple proposition. Also happens, those buffalo go down there, they get near those cattle, They say, oh no, these cattle are going to get brucellosis from the buffalo. Not a single case of transmission of brucellosis between a cow and a buffalo, or a buffalo, a cow in the wild. Not a single case of transmission. So I spend my time today, I was working on this EIS, and I find this irony returns to me. I'm talking to you about a public policy, and yet the fact is that the Indians don't even have a voice in the debate of the federal environmental impact statement process. We should, technically under the law, but who has a voice in it? State of Montana didn't even exist till 1890 after the buffalo were gone. A bunch of federal agencies that have no repertoire of experience with buffalo because they were brought about, National Park Service, all of them, pretty much when there was no buffalo left. And still to this day and age, I will tell you, this is, we could call it whatever we want. We could call it colonialism, or we could call it racism. The fact is that our voice, these people who know those buffalo, I know nothing about them folks, them buffalo, but those people who know them buffalo had ceremonies for them for, 50 generations back. Remember the time when the buffalo and the Lakota talk the same language? And some of those people even know some of them things. They can't even talk in this policy hearings, because we're not considered to be of stature. I pose that to you because I think that is really a challenge in environmentalism. A lot of these big environmental groups have a lot of influence. And it is important that that influence is used as well to increase the dialogue in this debate. Because it is all of us that are going to make this change. And if we could have that wellspring of knowledge with us, that is like absolutely key to recovering this relationship. So this winter I bring this issue to your attention because I'm someone who believes, like many other Indian people, that at the cusp of the millennium, the United States should quit shooting buffalo. We should quit shooting buffalo at the cusp of the millennium. That'll be a really good time. We got a winter coming up again, and they're going to do it again. And it is a challenge that we have. We have to expand the park. Buffalo should be able to leave live. Should not have to be dead to leave Yellowstone. It could be alive. Send it to the tribes. Do not be afraid, though. Do not be afraid of this. So from my perspective in closing, I talk about these issues. But those prophecies, which were told for so long, and that I, in my simplest of terms and fumbliest of words, try to express to you, are something which are so in our face today as Indian people. As you see a nation of buffalo that tries to return, in our ceremonies they say that, this one old lady, she told me, one of our elders, she talked about this vision. She talked about it, but they tell about this up there in our area, that this buffalo, she looked at this buffalo in her dreams, and this buffalo had only one leg. Only one leg. That's what they said. Said that they want back their 4 legs. That's what it said. But she said it required our people, and it required all of us to stand up for them. That's what they said. That's the only way that buffalo will be like that again. Have all 4 legs. And that is really the compelling set in the relationship. All of those parts of the creation, whatever they are, whether it is the water, whether it is the buffalo, whether it is the trees, they require humans to actually stand up to their responsibility that the Creator gave them. To stand up and to do the right thing. Which is in its essence the recovery of that which is sacred in the individual. The recovery of that relationship. The recovery of that relationship in policy. The recovery of that relationship in our lives. The recovery of what is right. Because we were all raised with the values of knowing and acknowledging that there is a right and there is a wrong. It is actually having the courage. It is actually having the courage to acknowledge that, and the courage to stand up on what legs we have for the rest of them critters. And in that process to recover that relationship to natural law, which in the end is what will guide all of us. Because you and I, we don't come from very different places. In the picture of the world, where Sherman Alexie, the great writer, says, what does he say, 99.9% the same. That's what they say genetically, don't they? And even men and women, isn't that an amazing thought? You know, it's like very little that's different about us. We are all relatives. You know, but in the end, it is this collective process of calling upon those teachings that are someplace in us. They're not in the mall. They're definitely not in the mall. And they're not featured in your fortune cookie. But they are in us, and it is calling upon that to recover that which is sacred. Nisuko Munik Miigwech, I want to thank you for your time, and I think we have our panelists, is that right? Going to join us and have some discussion. Miigwech.
Well, thank you for listening. I love listening to Winona LaDuke. And of course, it's the voice of a clan mother. And, I think it's about, again, talking about the importance of our relationship to all of creation in the way of the original people and the understanding of a spirit in everything, a living spirit, that everything around us is alive, as she was saying. And that concept of really, really understanding that, and how the importance of that is, and as far as recognizing that we are so responsible. We're responsible for what we're doing here. And some of the things certainly that have happened, like for instance to the buffaloes, is just shocking and incomprehensible. But this is not the only creature, the only one of our relations that this has happened to. In the way of the First Nations people, we recognize all of life as our relations, the creatures, everything, the creeper crawlers, the water people, even the tree people, everything, because we knew and that there was a spirit, that there was a conscious energy there, a relationship could be made, and it was made. And how it's important for us to recognize this for our well-being, because this is our fundamental nature. You don't have to be First Nations to know this. This is part of everyone. All humans have this connectedness, but many are unconscious and lost from that. She talked about a whole Haida village up there in the north being dismantled and taken and put into a museum. I didn't know that, but I do know that many of the sacred items that were, carried by the people are in museums behind glass. Now, I'm going to tell you a story about one of those sacred items that I've had an experience with in a roundabout way. When you have a sacred item, whether it's a sacred pipe, a chanumpa, wakam, which is sacred pipe, whether you have a drum, which is used for ceremony, whether you have a bundle, a medicine bundle with elements in it that you use for communication and healing and for prayer. All of these things have, of course, the living spirit within them. And they were originally brought together for purpose, very significant. And they were very revered and respected and taken care of. And when you have those things for hundreds of years that you're working with them in ceremony, and then they're taken away and they're put in a glass case, what happens to the energy of that element, of that bundle, for instance, or what is within the bundle, or the sacred pipe, for instance? What happens to that? There was, when I was guided to carry the sacred pipe by my teacher, I knew I was going to need a heart bag, what is called a heart bag, for that pipe. That's a place where you keep that when you're not praying with it. You keep it in its heart bag, okay, with sage. It's there and protected, and it's put on an altar until it's time to be used again. And I asked a friend of mine, this fella, Jim. It's an interesting story because Jim was this heavy machine worker. He worked for construction. He was a big guy, big hands, a big guy, burly guy, and you wouldn't think that he had the ability, but the Creator gave him this ability to be an incredible beater. I mean, making artifacts, replicating artifacts of the Plains Nations people. It's something that he was drawn to. He started looking, in museums and also in books about ancient artifacts, and he just was drawn, almost guided, I guess you'd say, to start learning how to bead. Now, it's a really delicate process to bead, and certainly to do it well. And he was doing it so well that when he went to different places where other, First Nations people, because he's a white guy, he's not native, but his heart is. And he would go there and he would show them the pouches or the war shirts or various things, the dresses that he would make with the fringe and the beading. The people who have been doing this and been taught by their grandmothers, they were really surprised and very much respectful to him. So I saw his work and I asked him if he would make me a heart bag for the Chinumpa that I was preparing. And I said I'd leave it in his hands to come up with the design, whatever it would be. I just told him the measurements that it needed to be. And so not long after that, maybe a couple of weeks, he said to me, he connected with me, he said, I've had a lot of leather pieces and various things to work with over the years, and I have a box filled with leather, deer skin, and so on. And he said, for a long while, I'd been picking up this one piece of deer skin, and he said, I'd think, well, I'm going to work with this. I'm going to make something out of it. And he said every time he did that, he got this message, no, not now, not now. So he'd put it back in the box. And he said that when I asked him to make this heart bag for the sacred pipe, he was drawn to that particular piece of deer skin. And he started working with it because it felt so right. He didn't get that message that he had gotten prior to that, to not work with that. He said something strange started to happen to him. He was looking in this book that he has about various First Nations artifacts that are in the museums. And that's how he gets some of his ideas for the beading and various things. And he said he found this picture of this pipe bag, this heart bag, and he started to work with the deer hide with the same design of this one that was in the museum. Now, the one that was in the museum was probably from the 1800s, early 1800s, that had been confiscated by someone from First Nations person. And there it was, all those years, kept behind glass. And he told me, he said, something strange is happening to me. He said, I don't know what's going on. He said, but I started working with this design, the bead pattern. And he said, I'm beading and I start crying. He said, the tears just start rolling out of my eyes. And he said, I'm really embarrassed, he said, because I don't know. I've never had this happen to me before. I don't know what's going on. Why is this happening? So I thought about this and I decided to take a little time. I said, I'm not sure, Jim. I said, let me think about it and see if I get anything. And so what I realized was, what came to me was that he was working on an ancient beading pattern. Okay, now in the tradition, it's usually the woman, the wife, perhaps, that would make the beading on a different, on a pouch or on a pipe bag. She would have a dream. She would take a dream, or she would take the dream of her husband, for instance, and she would take that dream and she would replicate it in beading on the sacred pipe bag, just to give you an idea how that worked. And what came to me was that whoever made that pipe bag must have been either the wife or the mother or the grandmother of probably, the son, grandson, or husband who was to carry that heart bag and carry that sacred pipe in it. And then, of course, for however many years, it was behind glass and just hanging out there, just not being used, not being honored, not being respected. The tradition of making something so sacred was ignored. The pattern of the beading has a meaning, meaning that you honor the dream, or you honor the spirit within that you're creating. It's very significant. It's a prayer, and so and very honored and very respected and taken care of. So now you have this completely separated from the original way, sitting behind glass. What happens to something like that? And I think that what he was doing, what I got was, he was reawakening the spirit, the energy, the spirit of that grandmother or that mother who had prepared that original heart bag that was in glass, because he was very good at making it exact, replicating exactly the design. And every time he'd start beating on it, he'd just start weeping. And I told him, I said, this is what I think is happening. I said, why don't you write down words that you feel in your heart when this happens, like you're speaking to this ancient person, or this old one, or the one who originally made this beading in this pipe bag, for something so significant as a sacred pipe. The sacred pipe, the Chunupawaka, is how you speak to the Creator, how you pray for help, how you pray for healing. And I know from my own experiences the healing that happens, from that pipe. We call it the unknown power, and it is a communicator to the Creator and to the four quarters, the four directions. So it's a teacher also. So he wrote down his feelings and gratitude. I told him to just give thanks and also asking for permission to be able to replicate this sacred design, because it is considered sacred. It have come in dream time or a vision, and then it was replicated on this pipe bag. So I just wanted to share that, because you think about all these sacred implements that were used by the people that were confiscated or destroyed, and what happens to them. Because there's a prayer put in these. It comes with the prayer. It comes with a communication and a responsibility. There was another thing I read a while back about the bundles, the sacred bundles of women. Many of the cultures, the First Nations people, had the different clans, a wolf clan or eagle clan, and so on. And there was this bundle. A woman who was writing this was a First Nations woman, and she was writing about the loss of the sacred items of the people and how devastating that was, because you have hundreds of years of some of these bundles, for instance, are passed through generation after generation after generation. And there was a bundle belonging to a women's clan called the Beaver Clan, the four-legged, the beaver there, and within that bundle were 300 elements of different creatures, feathers, sacred stones, perhaps roots, healing medicines, Vajuta Wakan, the medicines that heal, various other animals, bones, and so on. 300. It took 4 women to carry out this bundle. Every time they brought it out for ceremony. Now you have 300 elements that are sacred, that has a living spirit within these bundles. 300. You have to recognize every one of them. It's important. It's important to do that because you're praying, asking these elementals, the spirit of these, for help, for guidance, for healing, for communication to Creator, and so on. That's how you use the sacred elements. So it was 300 songs that they needed to learn. Every time they brought out this bundle, they opened it in a ceremonial way, and they had to sing 300 songs. Now, these 300 songs were passed down orally through generations after generation after generation. I mean, you think about that. Could you learn 300 songs and know it every time without writing it down or writing it on your in a file somewhere? But this is the oral way, the way of generations of communicating, but this was so significant. And when that bundle was destroyed, during the time when many of the sacreds were taken, I often thought about that. I said, what happened? What a loss. It affected me thinking about what a loss, because the medicine, I call it a medicine. You could call it an energy. You could call it the memory of the prayer or the frequency or the energy of what happened. What held that within that bundle? The sacred prayers. Because the prayers are for the people, the prayers are for the land, the prayers are for the healing, the generations, for the health, everything. That's what ceremony with these bundles is about. And when you use it for generation after generation after generation, that builds up a power and an energy. And then suddenly, it's gone. To me, that's very sad. I find that the same way with talking about the killing of all those buffalo, and various other things that are happening. You take down the tree, the great old tree. It affects the whole thing, the ecosystem. Everything is connected and related. We talk about that, how we are all related. And continuing with this understanding of the law of Creator, we call it, or the law of the land, is really what Winona was. She shared that. It's the law of the land, or the way of the original people, living according to the law of the Creator. I want to just share a little bit with you here about the Kogi. The Kogi people are, they call themselves the elder brothers. They call us the younger brothers. Why they do that is because, particularly the Kogi, disappeared into hiding when the Spanish first came. Now, they live in Colombia, South America, in the Sierra Nevadas. And when the Spanish came, they disappeared. And for 500 years, that's a long time. Nobody knew they existed until 1998. They exposed themselves for the reason that they became alarmed about what was going on, what was happening to the Mother Earth. Well, how did they know that? They were hidden way up in the mountains, in the Sierras, and nobody knew they existed. Now, how did they know what was going on in 1998? Enough serious to come out of hiding and expose themselves. Well, because they maintained their original ways, or their law of the land, a law of Creator, and what they call their law of origin. they have the ability, as most of the First Nations people did, and some of them still do, is to communicate with the spiritual realm. As for instance, what I was saying about the bundles or the sacred ceremonies of the Inipi, the various ceremonies that the White Buffalo calf woman came and brought the people. As Winona said, she brought the way to pray, okay? How to pray. And when you pray, you're in communication. And the prayer is powerful. The Kogi maintained their original way, the law of origins. So they have the ability to divine, what we call divining. And they have the ability to travel to a place they call the Aluna. Now, the Aluna is another realm. It's not here on the earth. Okay, it's through a portal or through a gateway into another realm. And they say that this is where they meet with the other beings, with the teachers there. And this has been going on from the beginning of their time. And they told me that we have been on the earth since the gods walked the earth. You know, I mean, so these people are very holy people, and they have what they call the feminine principle. And I just want to read a little bit of this to you, because they live according to this feminine principle. And so for 500 years, they've maintained this. So, and I've had the privilege of sitting with some of these mamos. They're called the MAMO. The mamos are the elders. And this is the way of life that holds all of creation in harmony and balance, and they maintain that. And we've talked about, I've talked to you about the First Nations people, and the original law, Creator's law, is the way of holding things in harmony and balance. It's maintained through not only their daily life, but through centuries of ceremonies for the purpose of harmonizing the whole earth and all of life. Now, they say that they were put here on the earth to harmonize all of life. They live in the heart of the world. They live in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, in one of the highest mountains there. And they say that that mountain, Gonawindwa, is the heart of the Mother Earth. And I was speaking the last time to you about the chakras of the Mother, the various chakra points. And this is one that I spoke about. And I did say that there are other First Nations people that also say different parts of their land is the heart of the Mother, like the Black Hills, for instance, Paasapa in the Dakotas, is also known as the heart of the world. And but there is my understanding of this is that so there's the heart of the world that the Kogi live in. There's the heart of the world that the Lakota live in. There's probably other First Nations people that say as well. And I felt that, the Mother, our Mother Earth, is going to need a big heart, or a lot of hearts, I suppose you want to say. For what was coming, she'd have to have a big heart. So that's why I figured there's Creator probably placed many hearts here on the Mother. But this is where they live, in the heart of the world, and their purpose is to harmonize the whole earth and all of life, and that includes us. So in their law of origin, the role of the feminine is fundamental, and they uphold women's status and position in society is very essential to them. Now, what is spoken of by the Kogi Mamas, these elders, is that in the beginning, and before there was anything at all, there was the Mother, and she was the source of all of life. And they call her Golkovang, the Great Sacred Mother. She is the origin of all things, often referred to as Spider Woman. She appears in various guises of her own creation. She is the Mother of Fire. She is the Mother of the snowfields. and she is equated with a Luna, a realm unknown to us, where the mama through thought or intention enter in order to commune with the sacred beings and to divine for guidance. She appears as a beautiful naked woman with long black hair. She sits on a black stone at the bottom of the sea. She is an invisible force floating upon the primeval waters. The great sacred mother has also appeared as a huge black serpent. She is seen as a huge black bird. She gave birth to manifestation by thinking it into being. She is creator and teacher. She gave us what we needed to live. The great sacred mother's teachings have not been forgotten right up to this day. The Kogis still live by it. For thousands of years, they have maintained the sacred law. And 500 years ago, they went into hiding when the Spanish came. They remained untouched, unaffected by Western influence, religious dogma, and technology, until 1989, when they became alarmed at what they realized was happening to the earth, to all of creation. Now, this part that I'm going to share with you here was so stunning to me. When they told me this about their law of creation and what happened and why they came out, they asked the Sacred Mother that they are in communication with. They asked the Sacred Mother if they could expose themselves to the world, to us, the younger brothers, to warn us that we must change our ways or humanity will not survive. And they were given permission. Now you have to think about that. I mean, I did 500 years hidden, no influence, no outside influence. And now they are so alarmed and concerned about all of us and the mother and the coming generations that they actually asked for permission to expose themselves. And they did. So the law of origin in Kogi society is reciprocity, as also Winona spoke about that. This reciprocity is very, 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 very important, because this is the way of the original people, is when you take something, you give back, and you don't take everything, okay? You be respectful. As a medicine, if you're searching out for medicines, for instance, you only take a small portion of them so the rest can grow as continuing for help for others. Now, the reciprocity is called Yoluka. This is the process through which balance of all life is achieved. And this is the way it functions in their society. The way they live daily, according to this law, and in aspects of their life, this principle is known. And I'll give you some examples. The pathways through the forest, for instance. When they're walking these pathways, the men and the women walk on one side and the men walk on the other. This is to maintain the balance of the feminine principle and the masculine, as it is in all of creation. A home is both masculine and feminine through its construction. One side has trees that are feminine, the other half has trees that are masculine. Now they know that there are masculine trees and feminine trees, the aspect of these trees, the spirit within them. They say that when the sun moves across the sky, it bisects it into one side that is feminine and the other side is masculine. The moon, in its beginning, it is a crescent, and that is feminine. As it comes into full bloom, one side is masculine, the other is feminine, again representing completeness, harmony, and balance. These are the kinds of concepts that they have received guidance as part of their law of origins and understanding creation. Men and women are the embodiment of principles, which is the harmony and balance of the world. It's constructed out of the partnership of masculine and feminine. And this is what we talk about when we talk about the return of the sacred feminine in the balance and harmony with the sacred masculine. The great sacred mother, she created a mother and father for everything, on the physical, metaphysical world, and in the Aluna. Every object of this creation has purpose and meaning, therefore must be sustained by balance of each of these mothers and fathers. So the message from the Kogis is, to us, little brothers, how is it possible that you have no knowledge of the law of origin? I call it the original instructions. How is it possible that we lost our original instructions? They're asking us that. We see through a secret science. This is them speaking. The secret science. Now this secret science, I'm just going to diverge here a little bit with the secret science, this knowledge, what they see through. We know that, for instance, the ones who are working, the elite and the cabal, and the ones who are working with these dark energies, for instance, I could say, well, CERN, we've talked about that. That's a secret science. Okay. Those are the people who hold that secret science. But these Kogi, they say we see through, we live through this secret science. So they still maintain this wisdom, you see, which is how to take care of, to protect and conserve the wilderness of nature. How to do that. Okay, not just thinking about it, but how to do it. Okay, how? How do you do it? That's a secret science. Or the other side of using the secret science to corrupt and disrupt and destroy. It has both sides, positive and negative, dark and light. Okay. So, speaking of CERN, I just want to mention I had a conversation, a very interesting and always wonderful conversation this morning with Patty and with Tracy. As we usually do, we run the gamut of many issues, many ideas. And I just want to say that please tune in tomorrow to listen to Tracy. She's going to share some information with you, new information, this very important new information that just came through about the CERN. And we did discuss that a little bit, so I just wanted to remember to mention that before I forget, because Tracy is another wonderful researcher, and what she shares with us is so important. So I just wanted to speak a little bit about this. The heart of the world was given, what was given to as an inheritance. They say the Kogi speak about this. We all have this inheritance, different parts of the world, different parts of the earth where we were given as our home, but the whole of the earth, they're connected to the whole of the earth. It just, the heart of the world was given to them through their inheritance, they say. And, but we have all inherited this earth, every one of us. So, I just wanted to call in my sister here, Patty, for a few minutes, maybe, I don't know, maybe longer, to see if Patty has any thoughts on what we've been listening to with Winona, or anything else that she wants to add and offer to us today. So, Patty, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I am here, I think. Should be, yes. I am. What a wonderful... Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. That means I'm here. But I just wanted to say the Winona LaDuke is... she's wonderful. I had to pull that audio for you so that you could play it today. But I want to let anyone know, if you go to YouTube, Winona, Winona, La Duke, Duke, She has quite a few videos there that I've watched a couple of them, not all the way through, but enough to realize that I definitely have to go back and rewatch every one of them. I want to thank you for playing that. And yeah, I did have something that I wanted to add. And when we talk about the ancestors and the first law, when we talk about the law of nature, and we look at what science has done, Winona talked about what was done with the buffalo, what is still done with the buffalo, how the indigenous plants of areas have gone extinct because they're being replaced with agriculture, and how important this is to maintain the diversity and the balance within nature. These are things that we know, that is within our hearts and within our history of our ancestry. Our ancestors knew this. This is where this knowledge comes from. But, Barbara, it's not rocket science. And it's not anything that cannot be learned. The wonderful thing that I think about, we're worried because a lot of times, because we want the message to get out there. The most important message. We want it out there, and that's that we are related, and that everything that we do to another is done to us in kind, and how closely linked we are with our ability to thrive. And we have every bit of proof. Science does not have the proof that nature does in showing you the truth of those words.
Yeah.
So if we have this knowledge and it's out there, then we have hope, because many people hear this. Many people know this to be true in their heart when they hear these words, and hopefully I pray that these people who do hear this will take it and pass it on. This is knowledge that is free. This is knowledge that is enduring and everlasting. This is the knowledge that we need most at this time.
Yeah. Well, I guess what gives me some hope too is, she spoke about NASA inviting the elders, asking them about global warming. It is kind of amusing, their response, but
it is.
And
I've heard that joke before.
I know.
I'm just kidding.
No, but it's true. And the other piece is, they have the wisdom and the knowledge because they're connected.
Right.
They've not gotten it out of a book.
No.
They're connected. That's the whole piece, is that they are aware and conscious of their connection, and they function in that relationship.
Exactly.
That's what I'm talking about. You are either in the relationship or you're not, conscious of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are in the relationship, but some are conscious and some are not.
Exactly.
And these elders are conscious of their relationship, and our rightful way, the original way, is we are in relationship consciously. We should be. And so when I hear that, and I've often said this, when I read things that scientists are puzzled about, when something occurs, in the ecosystem, or something occurs with an animal group, and they go, we don't know why this is happening. The scientists can't figure it out. My reply is, ask the elders.
Yeah. Well, the elders were talking about the climate changing decades ago.
Yeah.
They knew that this was happening. And science knew it was happening also, because science was creating it. And like every part of, she said something that was very, very apt, and they, similar to what I have, something that I wrote, in that they made laws that were accepted over the natural law. And they created laws in order to establish what they considered harmony, to make things better. And every law that they created in order to make it better for us, every law that we look at has been a detriment to the first law. It is a I don't know what the word would be that you would use. It covers up the truth. It is a veil of deception. Every law that was ever created by man has been to usurp the natural law. So we understand that too, and we can see the truth in that. That's another thing that is more telling than any book or any document or any PhD or any white paper written. The proof that we see with our own eyes and that we hear with our own ears. We see the proof of what science has brought us, and we see the proof of what the natural law is. And like you said, Barb, there's not a single one of us right now that do not have inherently the natural law as part of who they are.
Yeah.
Their genetic makeup.
Well, their laws, of course, are, specific to the corporate ideology.
Yeah.
What the corporation will need to make money, basically, for its product.
Right.
That's exactly, and it has nothing to do with natural law or original law. They're the Manifest Destiny group. They just make up the laws for their own pocket.
But I feel it's deeper than that even. If it were just happenstance here or there for resources or whatever, that would be different. And yes, the controllers who control the machine, they have manipulated and done their jobs very well. But I think it's important that we know that everything that has been done has not just been done for resources, has not just been done for conquest. The indigenous peoples, all of us, I don't care what color you are, I don't care what fur grows on your back, or what is your delicacy for supper, it doesn't matter, I don't care. You, me, all of us are under attack. From the very beginning, to take away not our lives, because they've managed to make sure that they don't kill us all off, so that's not the reason. And we're too willing to help them, so that's not the reason. But what is the one thing that they have gone to destroy from the very, very get-go of when they encroach upon the indigenous peoples? They take away their history. They take away the natural law. Right. Immediately. They take away that connection. That is what they are truly after, I think. That is why they have worked so hard to distract us and to keep us in states of concern and fear and anger, bliss, excitement, all of these things. All of this is done, in order to keep us occupied, but it has nothing to do with the original reason that they have waged war against us. And I do believe it's because of the wisdoms that we hold and the people that you were talking about. The truth is so powerful.
Yeah.
And each person has that truth.
Yeah.
Already.
Yes, exactly. No, I agree with you on that. That's that secret science that the Kogi say.
Yes.
That I was talking about. then we all had that secret science. And certainly the First Nations people, many still do maintain that. And that's what they don't want. They don't want us to have it. But yes, like you're saying, we all had that knowledge. We were all given that wisdom. And for centuries and centuries, they've been diligently chipping away at that piece. Yeah. So.
Yeah, because they'll let us call ourselves First Nations. They'll let us come together in a powwow. They don't want us, our culture, totally forgotten. What they want is our culture totally rewritten.
Well, they want the science. We could call it science. Well, we call it wisdom. You know, they want that knowledge taken away from us because it is a power.
Yeah. See, it's all about powwows and
Money.
Money now and casinos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So yes, and so this is why we're talking about this, because I think yes, this is very succinct. We pinpointed this. We've been talking about this. What is the whole thing behind the madness? Why the assaults? Why the chemtrails? Why the geoengineering? Why? You know, well, partly it is, of course, to sicken us so that we can't even think straight. You know, that's one thing. And to become dependent, to lose that peace within ourselves, to become so hopeless, that we lose our faith, we lose that connectedness. And what is the connectedness we're talking about? We're talking about the connectedness to life, to creation. It's our right, basically, it is our fundamental nature. It's our right that we are in this connection. We're living here on the earth. And if you don't walk out the door and you don't relate to your environment, if you don't relate to the life around you, well, what are you relating to? Where are you being led?
Well, I do believe, the moment that the last memory of our connection, if they ever get there, the last moment of our connection that we share with the earth, with the universe, with each other, with every living being, known and unknown, and with the Creator, in the moment that is totally wiped from the last indigenous person's mind, we won't have a Mother Earth anymore. I truly believe that. Not devoid. They will ravage. They have no sense of this connection. They hate this connection. Whoever these people are, they despise the fact that we have this knowledge and that we are part of every living thing, that we communicate with every living thing, that we have lived with and understood and known every living thing, and we have done it in honor and respect. This is an anathema to them. They cannot stand this connection. This connection must be greater than anything they've ever known.
And it is.
Yeah.
And they're afraid of it.
And they are.
Yeah.
So we have a more important part to play now,
Well, that's why they're working so hard, because it is important. When somebody spends so many, hundreds of years, against something, you have to look at it and say, okay, it must be very important that we're very important because we're sharing this knowledge and this information, and I know we talked about repeating ourselves, that we feel like we're repeating ourselves, and, I was sharing with you how, sometimes I feel that way too, and you wonder, is anybody listening? What impact are we making? And I just told that little story about when I used to sit with my teacher, Wallace Black Elk, and he would tell the same story over and over, as elders do. And I would grumble, and I would say, oh, I've heard this story before, but being respectful, I would sit there and, being respectful, and I would listen, and an amazing thing started to happen. Okay, so I found that invariably during the same story that I heard, or I thought I heard, or I claimed I heard, in fact, I heard something different. I heard something new. something new came to me out of that same story that I thought I knew. And I realized that in that moment that this is the way that the First Nations people, this is the way that our people taught the children. Because when you're in the womb and you're sitting there in that dark winter, in that, in that teepee, in that sacred house, or wherever you're in with the other people, the storytellers, the elders are speaking, they're telling the stories, and these are teachings. This is the wisdom. And you're hearing it in that womb. Then you're a toddler, and you're there too, and you're hearing it. And each stage that you go through up into into adulthood, you receive certain new information from the same teaching. Yeah.
I think it's storytelling, especially generational storytelling, passed down from generation to generation, lore, things like this. I think the difference between that and what we call knowledge, that words written in books, I think the difference is when you go to school and you read the book, your mind attempts to comprehend what is written and to put it in a logical way so that you can understand it. In our people and in other cultures who have storytellers, we go to the heart first.
Yeah.
And then the heart speaks to the mind. And I think that's the difference, because it's not as cold. It's not as it touches us in a way and tells us the truth of what we're hearing. There's no, the one thing that I so love is to sit across and in the evening and listen to the elders speak, even if they're not telling a story per se. When they're speaking with each other,
Yeah.
and they're talking about the old ways, and they're discussing life, my heart is just, it fills. It is so full. It's as if it ate the biggest banquet meal.
It's still a story. It's a teaching. Just when you're having just that conversation, okay, so it's a story, but it has a meaning, a deep meaning through that story that's woven in and out throughout that story that has been passed down through generations and generations, is a teaching. It's the wisdom held within that story, and an outsider might think you're just talking about, a coyote and a rabbit, but with this, it's just a story about a coyote and a rabbit. But no, there's wisdom and teachings woven within that story.
My mom used to tell me a story that my family used to tell about how the weeping willow became the weeping willow.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I would hear the story, it was a little bit different. It was the same, but it was a little bit different. But every time I heard it, it taught a lesson so profound that this is the difference between passing these stories. Like you say, they each have a lesson within them. All the stories that are passed down, even those of prophecy, have a lesson within them that you can understand, that you can see, that you can know. And the lesson of the weeping willow had a lot to do with, I don't want to go into it now because, for one, we have 1 minute left before
but also let's say,
Rise
and Awakening is coming up next.
Yes, and they will have Jeff Edmondson, and they will probably be covering geoengineering. Okie dokie. We have 1 minute.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, the time went very quickly, and
yes, it did.
Yeah, thank you for popping on here with me, and the storytelling may be another conversation, because there's more to the storytelling and what the storytelling really means. What is really brought forward. What are the life lessons, and how are they, brought forward, and what are those life lessons? That's the important thing, through the stories, I think. So I just want to thank everyone, and thank you, Patty, and thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, I just want to say, may your children be strong and happy, and you as well, all the listeners, and just have a peaceful night.